Welcome to another episode of A State of Mind, and thank you so much for tuning in. I deeply appreciate everyone listening. Thank you for your comments, your support. If you have found this podcast valuable and want to support us, please visit patreon.com/A State of Mind. Even $2 or $5 or $10 makes a big difference. Another way you could support this show is by sharing it with friends, sharing it on your own social media accounts. And please send me a message if you want to be a part of this conversation. Today, I'm speaking with my friend Kevin McKeag. And Kevin is a life and personal development coach living in Boulder, Colorado. This is actually the second time having him on the podcast. So check out our first conversation if you haven't. It was way back, episode number 8. And it was called Love and Power and Why It Matters. Seems like a long time ago when we were recording that one. Also, all these podcasts are now going up on YouTube. So check that out if you want to see what we look like. So in this episode, you will be relieved perhaps to hear that it's not really about politics. It's getting back more into the terrain that we usually have on this podcast of personal development, meditation, and mindfulness. And one of the things that Kevin and I talk about is a need to have a healthy, positive vision of masculinity in our society, to take in the lessons of the Me Too movement, but to not collapse, to not say that being a man is a bad thing, to actually offer what healthy, vibrant, embodied masculinity could look like. And we talk about that a little bit, and it's something that I hope to discuss more on the podcast in the future. We talk about power and hierarchy, and the important difference between what are called Dominator hierarchies and growth hierarchies. Dominator hierarchies are when a person or an organization is oppressing, they're using power over someone else or other groups of people, and it's not good, and so they're criticized for good and valid reasons. Growth hierarchies, on the other hand, are actually hierarchical arrangements which support our growth, be it individually or collectively. And one of the things that we talk about in this conversation is how we can't really escape hierarchies. It's not going to work to try to make everything completely equal. So if you want to know more about what I mean by that, keep listening. And then we also talk about integral theory. We talk about stages of human development. We discuss a little bit what ego or self can mean and how to work with our sense of self. And then Kevin shares with us about Taoist sexual yoga practices that he's been doing for a number of years. It was really cool to get to hear about this from him. And one of the things that I appreciated about the way that he presents this stuff is cultivating this energy, this life force in ourselves, and using it to power our own creativity and our own development. I think anytime sex or sexuality is brought up, it's a sensitive topic. And I've now had a number of episodes that touch on this topic of sacred sexuality. I think it's an important topic, and I think it's something, it's a distinct topic, different from how to have, better communication in your relationship or relationship stuff in general, though it's obviously related. We're talking about sex, sexual energy. It's the same energy that conceived us in the first place. And if we want to get more cosmic with it, that maybe birthed the universe, whatever the big bang was, the cosmic orgasm that brought all this into being. And I don't think it's something that needs to be in the shadows. If you look back at the episode I did, I think it was episode number 48 with Ben Jaffe, and we discuss Karma Sutra and Karma Mudra, sexual yoga practices from the Tibetan Tantric Buddhist tradition. And it's a whole fascinating world to look at. And I think the bigger point perhaps for most listeners of this podcast, it's not to join some new religion or get really into Tibetan Buddhism, for example. That's not my point, at least, in talking about this stuff, but how we can bring our mindfulness and our sense of purpose to all the domains of our life, including our sexuality. On the one hand, it can make it, we can increase our pleasure. That's actually a good thing. Let yourself feel pleasure. And then we can cultivate our energy and become more conscious there. It can be very powerful, it can be very insightful. I think it's worth doing. And it's connected with this larger question of how we can become more whole, more integrated beings, rather than separating off these different parts of ourselves, which, historically speaking, this culture and many cultures across the world have done, especially when it comes to sexuality. So those are a few of my thoughts on this topic at the moment. This was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And without further ado, I bring you Kevin McKeag. Kevin, good to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be here.
Yeah,
thanks for the invite. Last time we covered some pretty interesting ground, and I'm hoping to dive in and kind of flesh out some more theory and share some more experience. I hope it's helpful to your audiences.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I loved our first conversation. It was one of the earliest ones back at the start of the podcast. And and you're still working as a coach, mostly with men, right?
Yeah, mostly with men. My practice is open to whomever wants to come in, but I've found myself over the past year working mainly with men.
That's great. I think there's such a need there.
Yeah, I think so too, especially because a lot of the coaching community is geared around like female leaders, and it's a predominantly female craft.
Yeah. I've recently met a couple, actually 3 women in Boulder who are like very successful coaches, personal development kind of gurus, and they have big Instagram followings. And so that's been interesting to see. And so I think that there's a lot around women's empowerment. And part of why I wanted to have you back on was to talk about like healthy male masculinity. What does it mean to be a healthy man in the world?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And before we start into that, I just want to say that people see men's empowerment, at least I do, and I cringe a little bit.
With the word?
Yeah, I think so, because our ideas of power and strength have become, I think, really poisoned over the past few centuries. And what does strength actually mean anymore?
What is true strength, genuine strength?
Yeah, totally. I had a teacher at Naropa University where you and I both went, who said that in Europe pre-World War I and World War II, people would sign letters instead of sincerely or warmly, they would sign it strength. It would be like,
oh, wow.
Hey, Julian, writing this to tell you I'm into the podcast, strength, Kevin. And
I love that.
His idea was that in the world wars, because there was such kind of brute force just annihilating the planet and the territory, that we forgot what strength was, and there was kind of this dissolution of how we felt about ourselves, especially as men, especially as soldiers,
Well, there's this I'm going to try to get the title right, a book that was pretty influential and well-known. I think it's called Power versus Force. And it was this idea of, at least part of the idea of it was like power in that book, at least in that philosophy, is this like coming from within, coming from this place of like wholeness and something that includes everyone, and force is like making something happen. And we've confused the two. And modern technology gives us a tremendous amount of force, but it's not the same as like genuine power that's actually moving us with our own volition, together.
Yeah, I remember a book by Starhawk, who was that epic green author.
Yeah,
who wrote the fantasy novels and stuff about new ways of living. She talked about that inner power from within versus dominant power outside.
That's another. Yeah, maybe that's a good way to say it. Power from within versus outside. Force.
Sure. And I don't have any problem with power per se. A lot of people are really leery of it for good reason. I mean, in our own communities, there are lots of power plays and people who are taking advantage of their position in a dominance position. And well, you and I know because we've been in these communities so long, but many folks are completely taking advantage of their students or younger people or of their clients. So and that's fucked up.
That's wrong. Yeah, and it's good to say that clearly.
Yeah, but it's so tricky because there's the old axiom power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So are you and I to say, like, no, we renounce power altogether? It is fundamentally flawed? I don't think so. I don't really want to live that way. And this ties into our first conversation.
Yeah.
Around actually modulating power with love, compassion, care, the desire to do good in the world.
Totally. I think wasn't that the title, Power and Love?
That was it.
So yeah, it was a great conversation. And I just wanted to, this is such a rich territory. Before we get into it more, I kind of wanted to give people a little bit more about you. People can listen to that episode, but you've been doing coaching for what, 4 or 5 years?
That's it. Yeah. 4 years.
Yeah. And you studied a lot of integral theory.
Yeah.
From Ken Wilber, and a lot of men's work and sexuality. So.
Yeah. More recently, I've been studying Terry O'Fallon's work and her later stages of development. The quote meta-aware tiers post-integral. So I've been kind of dipping a toe into that territory of like, okay, integral is this bright line, and then what then? Like, what comes after that, and what does that mean about yourself and your ego and for our culture?
Beautiful. Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm a big fan of integral theory. I think there's a lot of positives there, and we can get more into that. I feel like it hasn't taken root in the way that it potentially could have. And at the same time, I think it's been really influential across our culture, kind of behind the scenes. Like, a lot of people don't know about integral theory per se, or know the terminology or the lingo, but a lot of the ideas have percolated. But just the idea that we have stages of development that we can move through, and we can grow, we can develop, and then our whole being can embody a healthier, more holistic, more connected way of being. Right? It's a little tricky to talk about.
It is and it isn't. There are a few tenets of integral that are pretty straightforward. You grow through stages as an individual,
right.
And cultures seem to echo those because, individuals form collectives. So naturally you have...
There's like a center of gravity in a culture that more or less is its baseline.
And in spiral dynamics, which integral theory draws off quite a lot, you have this idea of values memes. And the reason it's memes is because it's mimetic. Like, you're mimicking how I'm operating and seeing the world, and that's what creates that center of gravity. Which is really cool to think about because human beings do that constantly. I mean, when you think about meme, it's like, I got 12 memes this morning in Instagram, and I sent some of those off to other people. It's like we're constantly sharing how we do things and how we view the world. Including with this podcast. In a way, this is a meme. This is us kind of transmitting.
We're sharing information, perspectives, ways of seeing things, ways of understanding.
Yeah.
And then I guess what I was going to add to that piece around these stages of development, it's not controversial at all to look at childhood development and adolescence and then adult, but it is still somewhat unknown or somewhat controversial. Some people may not agree with it, that as an adult, you can progress, you can develop through different stages that could actually be studied, that could actually be mapped out. Like, Robert Keegan in Harvard did a good job of looking at a lot of that. And then Ken Wilber was like marrying spiritual development to this kind of model of development. And it can be complicated, but I think having some sense that our life can be a path in which we're growing and developing, it's a much richer perspective to take than you just are the way you are because of the way you were born or the way you were raised or your genetics. And
not only you are the way you are in a kind of stymied and stuck way, but even more insidious, my way of seeing the world is absolutely correct, and all of these other different ways are like wrong. Right. So, and that's why Wilber talks about the meme wars, or this idea that at a given meme, like pre-integral memes, all see the world in a more collapsed kind of tunnel vision.
And it's the culture wars. My way or the highway.
Yeah.
Rather than how do we include and understand all these different perspectives and worldviews.
Yeah. How do we integrate?
Yeah,
exactly. Can I see my own... I have friends who refuse to wear masks in public.
Yeah, I know some people like that as well.
And I respect those people. And at least my friends, like, I don't know a lot of anti-maskers, but the people that I know who don't wear masks and do it for a reason, like, I respect them and get where they're coming from about not wanting to give up their personal freedoms for anything or anyone. I don't operate that way in the world. For me, wearing a mask during COVID outbreak, like, is a consideration that I'm happy to adorn, so to speak. But where is the fuck you don't tell me what to do in me, and can I attune to that? You know, I'm pointing to this area of my belly, of this kind of like power center. And you study religious studies, so you know the chakras and the power core here in the yoga tradition. What about that is integral to my own being, where I can say that's really important? You know what I mean?
Well, I think this is a beautiful introduction to some of these ideas for a lot of folks. And I think part of what you're speaking to is, like with the mask question, like our sense of personal power, sense of choice. Like if ideally, like we would understand the consequences of our actions and make a good choice for the collective, at least in my ideal world. But I think where some people are reacting is they feel like they're being treated like children and told what to do. And it doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of situations where there's some requirement, like, you know, wear a mask here, or like this facility, like for example, a gym is being closed down because of coronavirus. Well, like it just, there's like a lack of logic in some of our decision making around how to prevent coronavirus spread, because a gym is a place, like we should be encouraging people to exercise. Like that's one of the best things we can do for ourselves. And so like I have a gym here where I live, and they've reduced the hours. It used to be 24 hours. Now it's like 9 to 5. And they're not trusting ourselves to be appropriate, to not go in there, you know, to just keep a certain number of people in there and not have too many people in there. I guess that's the logic, but it feels like we're being treated like children, and there's no actual reason that I can understand why that gym can't be open 24 hours a day, given the precautions that we're all very aware of and are following.
Got it. So, yeah, I don't want to veer too much into the politics of the situation.
Yeah.
I will say, like, as a cute aside, my grandma calls COVID Covic for some reason, and like my family keeps correcting her, but she doesn't hear well, so she'll be like, okay. "Oh, Kev, you know, I was gonna fly up to Rhode Island to see your mom, but I didn't want to catch the COVID and the flights are."
Well, okay, just to kind of bring it full circle, like we talk about a society having a certain level of development, like a center of gravity. I think part of what's going on, part of why people don't like, some people don't like liberals or the left or Democrats, they don't like the idea of a nanny state. They don't like being told what to do. They don't like being treated like children. But so I just think that we could engage, like people are more intelligent than we tend to give ourselves credit for. Like if we treated each other like intelligent, sensitive beings, we could call forth that part of ourselves. We could work together. Whereas some of the stuff that might be for our own good, even something like a seatbelt law, like I understand why it's a law, like I agree with it, but like how do we engage with each other so that we want to make these choices rather than feeling like they're forced to, or we're being treated like we're not able to make intelligent choices for ourselves.
Right.
And maybe there's a situation where you actually don't need to wear a seatbelt, like that would actually not be helpful. Like there's always exceptions to these kinds of rules we try to create. So I think a higher level of development would like be able to see that, be able to include that. So anyway.
Yeah, which is to my point about actually respecting these different worldviews that are drastically different than mine.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think that's an important faculty that comes online with Integral. Also the ability to start to really see projections as they begin to arise, although Integral is still working out how to do that moment to moment. It's not an immediate thing. In post-integral stages, you start to see how everything that's arising in your field, as it were, and as you're speaking and judging the world and filtering it, like has a lot more to do with you than you previously thought.
Beautiful.
And not in a narcissistic way or a tunnel way, but more that the way that we see the world really, in a moment-to-moment fashion, really is dictating how we're,
like
receiving information and knowing others.
So like we could take more responsibility for our own perceptions, like our own way of perceiving.
Yeah, that's the idea. And also that awareness is much quicker than thought. And it's much quicker than judgment. So I had a coach of mine use a really beautiful term the other day that I haven't heard in a long time. It's called clairsentience. So rather than clair like voyance or clair audition, I don't know what the term is exactly, but you have these
like clairvoyance.
Yeah. Instead of clairvoyance, it's the ability to feel and sense that's beyond rationale and beyond the mind altogether. And those are really kind of exciting territories to think about and to feel into, because we were talking about Wilber, and Wilber has this idea of the contemplative eye, the need to go past your rational mind and into a felt sense of something that's beyond that. And I guess clairsentience, in my mind, is that it's post-rational and it's beyond cognition. And it's because awareness kind of trumps thought and emotion and mind, and awareness is deeper and far more essential.
More fundamental.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
absolutely.
So I don't know where you want to go with that. Having touched on that, I feel like we could just sit here in silence for another hour. Because when you're talking about awareness itself, you're talking about the thing that completely transcends the speech habit,
or thinking,
the desire to make constructs out of the world and, have it fit into an ordered kind of reality, rather than relying on this clairsentience and this awareness in the moment. And that's why Suzanne Cook-Reuter calls the first post-integral stage construct aware, because your awareness begins to see that it's been operating through reality tunnels, and you've been constructing reality in the way that you are, not in the way that it is. So there's this really kind of liberating quality
beautiful
with that. And also kind of it's just like a deadly rug swept out from under the ego too. Some people oscillate back and forth from integral to construct aware and back and forth for years, and it's because it's so destabilizing, as you can imagine, because it's kind of like, this idea of one taste, or there not being a fixed or definite self. And you and I think, have had enough drug experiences with psychedelics.
Maybe you have.
Okay, I'll speak for myself, that sometimes those experiences can be really terrifying. I know we talked about that on the first podcast.
Yeah.
Of this kind of open water.
Be destabilizing or terrifying, or you just said a lot, and it was well said. It was beautiful.
Thanks.
Can you say again about the construct aware? I'm not as familiar with that.
Sure.
Is that a stage of integral? Is that beyond?
It's post-integral.
Okay.
Terry O'Fallon thinks that it's an entire new stage. I believe in Wilber's matrix, it's kind of a more grown-up version of integral. It depends who you ask.
Yeah.
But what I know,
like, you're aware of the constructs that you're creating. Is that part of what you?
Yes, you start to become aware of the constructs you're creating, and rather than having a fixed identity with a subtle self, you begin to notice more causal energies, or energies that stem from the independent origination, or the alpha and the omega, or the kind of source energy that we talk a lot about.
And then
does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't want to get too caught up in terminology.
Yeah, I want to make it so something people can connect with, but this idea of an integral stage of development, getting to a place where you can see and understand and integrate different worldviews, different perspectives, without making any of them absolute. So in the realm of politics, one way I might try to explain that would be instead of, this candidate's right and this candidate's the devil, it's they both have things to offer, maybe.
Devils.
They're both devils.
Kidding.
Being able to not identify with a certain position so intensely. That would at least be part of it.
Right, yeah, that has to do with the lessening entrenchment in your fixed self or identity as you progress along stages.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, so less identity. And then I think there is some risk, some danger as you loosen your sense of yourself. It could be a danger of like losing a sense of who you are, or Ken Wilber talks about post-perspectival madness.
Yeah, he calls it aperspectival madness.
Aperspectival madness.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you're seeing so many different ways of viewing the world that it's just this flood.
Right.
This overwhelming flood.
And I can relate to that. I feel like I've experienced that.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of our community here in Boulder, Colorado, I think is really stymied in that. And it makes it really hard to make any fucking decisions about life because you're stuck thinking and knowing on some level that one way of living and one reality isn't all that much better than another.
Yeah. You see the relativeness of everything, but then it's hard to make distinctions and decisions in a relative situation. So it's kind of easier if you just have one point of view and this is who I am and like I'm moving forward in this direction. That's like a simpler, easier way. And I see a lot of successful people, like maybe our President Trump, like he's like kind of a master at that. He's like, the world is too complex, don't worry about it. Here's the right way. Just listen to me. And that's a real danger, but it's also a lot easier to fall into that.
Yeah. Fixity is very comforting.
It's comforting, yeah.
Yeah.
And you have that as a child. You can just follow what the teacher says or follow what your parents say.
And being more developed and identifying less with a fixed ego isn't necessarily better. You know what I mean? It's like having more access to awareness. I think I keep quoting Wilber, but he's such a master and I so appreciate his work. So
yeah.
I remember in one of his books he talks about, oh no, I'm sorry, this isn't Wilber. This is Trungpa Rinpoche, another great master, Buddhist master.
Yeah.
That a layperson or a commoner might feel suffering in the world as like the hair of a brush across their arm. Like the feeling of this. Whereas an awakened master might feel that same hair or brush like across their eyeball. Like 100 times more sensitive to the suffering in the world.
It's more intense.
Trungpa, and then Wilber, you as you grow and develop and progress, like you suffer more and it bothers you less. Because you become acclimated to this less fixity of ego identification and the sense of just being awareness itself. So you've begun to transcend the suffering in yourself, and then you're able to more deeply sit with that in other people and in the world.
Beautiful.
You suffer more and it bothers you less. So it's not particularly a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to talk a lot of shit about Trump, or, there's intelligent people on both sides, and it's a lot of people who are trying to think for themselves on both sides, but what I feel like is worth speaking out against is a kind of anti-scientific perspective or anti-intellectual, or like I think part of what you're speaking to is when we talk about awareness, it's something very simple, something we all have. There can be the simplicity of just letting yourself be aware, letting yourself let go of effort, let go of concepts. And you can still respect someone who is an expert in a particular field. That's something to value, and not to just say it's all a conspiracy theory, or it's all bullshit, or it's all some new world order coming down.
Yeah.
I guess my mind is on politics because of the election and stuff, but I think what we're talking about really does matter. It's not theoretical. It relates to the way we're living our lives, and you see it in the world, and it has real effects. The way we see the world matters.
So you're talking about these different stages.
These different stages.
Yeah,
they really matter. They really do matter. And we're constantly being tempted to go to a kind of more comforting, what seems like an easier, lower way of seeing things, like where you just like little kids at the playground throwing insults at each other. And what I want this podcast to do is be an inspiration, like get to a deeper conversation, a deeper way of seeing things.
Yeah. There's this great line from the book Dune, and we were going to talk about Dune.
Yeah.
And I think it goes something like, the clear and easy path that leads ever into stagnation.
That's such a good line. Yeah.
Because in this book, the hero of this book is starting to have these kind of mind-bending perceptions of time and space collapsing in, and him being on a kind of continuum, where he could almost like feel into and read the future. And Paul Atreides, the hero of this novel, is trying to figure out how to navigate the world, and that's one of his axioms. Don't choose the clear and easy path that leads ever into stagnation. Like, you've got to take risk. It's got to be dynamic. It's got to be hot. There's got to be,
yeah,
like,
and if you're in that heat, if you're in that suffering, that could be a good thing. Maybe you're more alive.
I think so, yeah. David Deida used to talk about how his teachers would describe the sacred sex practices and being fully awakened in them as being on fire. Because you're so alive and you feel so much. Another incredible teacher that I've been following for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I kind of want to bring this conversation back full circle to this discussion around power that we started off with. And you said a lot of interesting things about it. And I think, what was I going to say? I think a lot of people, because there's been so much abuse of power and so much abuse of dynamics, and it's like worth it to speak out against that.
Yeah,
but the answer the answer to that is not
don't be a dick, be a good person.
Yeah, be a good person.
Yeah.
But also don't give up your own power because you're afraid of it.
Right.
And that's what I see happening in a lot of spiritual communities, or at like Naropa University where we went, where everyone wants to be good. Basically, we want to go to a place like that.
Yeah. And let's commit to a level of mediocrity so that nobody offends anyone else.
Right. That's
yeah.
That's the safe route. Right?
That's the safe and easy route that leads ever into a stagnation that we're all, agreeing to, consensual stagnation.
Oh, man.
So no, if anything, I'm on here trying to be apolitical, but here's a policy. Utilize practices that have been handed down from these masterful traditions and get into your own fire and way of living in the world. And that's going to be polarizing. But, maybe it's going to create the friction, the heat to make some fucking change for the better. Who knows?
Yeah, like something good could come out of some conflict at times.
It could. And again, we get into this question of aperspectival madness of how do you know? How do you know that the actions that you're having are of ultimate benefit to the universe, or that there is an ultimate benefit at all? So, and that's part of the suffering. How do you grapple with that big question? What is the meaning of all this? And, how am I seeing the world and people and the universe in a way that's actually creating this kind of stuckness of perspective? That's a huge issue right now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah.
I'm talking about like green in spiral dynamics, or
which is the stage
pluralism. It's directly pre-integral.
And maybe if the word green level of development doesn't mean anything to you, like this idea of relativism, right? It's like a cornerstone of that. Everything is relative, everything is equal, we're all equal, all these ideas are equal. And that can be very pathological because not all ideas are equal.
Right.
It confuses, in my mind, it confuses the relative and the ultimate way of looking at things. Like, we are all equal in a lot of ways, but in a given situation or in a given, discussion, some points of view may be more helpful, more insightful, more valid than others. And so if I'm in a classroom, for example, go back to Naropa University, and we're all sitting in a circle.
Yeah, I was in that classroom sitting in a circle.
So like if we're all there, we're all sitting in a circle, we're all equal, and we all get to say our thing, but one person read the book and really took notes and really thought about it, and the other person didn't read it at all. Well, the person who read the book, like, I want to listen to what they have to say a little bit more, because they've actually put some effort into it. They're not just making something up on the spot.
That's a really good example. Yeah, and so integral consciousness, if you will, or the value meme of integral, will start ranking truths and say this has more or less truth, this has a lot of truth, this is truth-ish.
Maybe this isn't true, right?
But this is totally false, but not totally, because nobody is 100% wrong. So there are myriad ways of looking at the universe, but can we find a few that represent these different structural memes and say, like, there's a lot of value inherent in these, but an increasing amount of value. So can you bring back ranking
Yeah.
because it's gone out of style.
Yeah, it's kind of edgy just to say that you could rank ideas or rank levels of truth. One way that I like to think about it that I've heard discussed quite a bit on podcasts and, different places is like, you're talking about ranking, you're talking about creating a hierarchy. And the word hierarchy is so loaded and is blamed for everything. So to make a distinction between a dominator hierarchy, which is all the negative stereotypes of hierarchy, versus a growth hierarchy, which is a natural ordering that supports our growth. Kind of, which is what you're talking about. Like if you rank truth and something is more true and something is a little bit less true, that would be a growth hierarchy rather than some kind of tyrant forcing his way on everyone else, which is like the dominator hierarchy.
Yeah. So. Yeah, and I read Terence McKenna and his ideas on dominator hierarchies like pretty early on, and I was like, yeah, down with the hierarchies. And that's exactly where I was at for that time, and that really spoke to me. And after 10 years or more of practicing with these ideas, ranking is dope. And even if you don't like it, it's not going anywhere because it informs our being and it has unfolded our literal evolution. And the fact that you can say everything is relative and all of these ways of seeing the world have equal validity, and then everybody that doesn't see the world like that is wrong, is your own hidden way of ranking reality. So that's the performative contradiction of
Can't escape it. Like we're kind of forced to evaluate and rank things, whether we want to or not.
Yes. Yeah, right, exactly. It's part of our makeup, our DNA. It's part of our evolutionary unfolding.
Yeah.
I don't know if you follow Jordan Peterson at all, but he talks about the lobster and how the serotonin-based nervous system is older than trees. And it's the thing that creates dominator hierarchies in lobsters and in human beings. Yeah. And it's like, good luck, procedurally removing that, from your system. Yeah. That's how you even are aware that the world exists. Right. It's why you're not part of the fossil record.
Right. Why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you use it with wisdom and
compassion?
Sure, yeah, exactly. And can you get more granular on what you mean by better truth,
Yeah, I heard someone, I think it might have been Sam Harris or someone like that, and they made this point that I thought was well made of like, if you think we're all equal and everything's equal and you really don't like the idea of hierarchy at all and want to get rid of them all, then like, why don't you go have kids with everyone that you meet, Like that proves to me it totally proves that whether you want to or not, we are evaluating people and we are making life choices, who we go on a date with. Like, yes, we're all equal. Yes, we all should have the same human rights. Absolutely. And then in our own life, like we get to make evaluative choices. Do I like this person or not? Do I want to move in with this person or not? It's not going to take us very far if we just do that with everyone, right? It doesn't make sense.
I love the way you said that in saying, yes, we are all equal and have equal rights, and that needs to be protected.
Absolutely.
And we're still ranking, and that's a fundamental way of how we make sense of the universe.
We make value judgments for ourselves.
Same with ego. Ego gets a bad rap, but ego is, I want you to define ego, actually, because you're the
therapist.
Religious studies.
Well, the word, that's such a big question. I actually wrote a long paper for my master's degree in Buddhist studies on what is the self. So usually ego means our self or our sense of self, and in my understanding, the historical reason why we use that word ego so much is one, Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was translated from German into English, and the word ego was used for his, he had super ego, which is like our perfect idea of how we should be, and then our ego, and then the more animal nature, and the ego kind of mediates between the
id, the ego, the super ego.
And so that's where this idea of ego started coming in popular use. And then Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche actually was this great Buddhist master. He started using the word ego to translate the word self in the Buddhist teachings.
Yeah.
So it's to make it simple, like it's our sense of who we are and how I identify.
Yeah. So ego as self, like you don't want to lose self. I know this is probably an obvious lesson for people who have practiced spirituality and gone through the fluctuations of the spiritual path. At least for myself, there was this idea at first that I had to destroy myself in order to taste something beyond myself. And as ambitious as that is, it doesn't work because you're tearing down and tearing down and tearing down, and there's always something left over, which is that you exist and that awareness is arising at all moments. And after you've been tempered in some of these spiritual traditions, you realize that the elegant thing to do is kind of include ego as a kind of functional tool that you use as let's say, a diving board to flip into the deep water of mystical experience.
I like that.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It becomes a vital support system for your experience.
It reminds me of the saying, the mind makes a terrible master, but a great servant.
Right.
You know, our mind, that's our ego, right? I mean, all our things we're constantly thinking about, constantly worrying about, constantly obsessing about.
I don't know if it's that simple, but I also, it's a really tricky thing to talk about. I think there's something to that of like, you know, the constant, and I'm a meditation teacher, so I'm constantly advising my students, my clients, to find the cracks between when a thought comes and when it goes, and have the taste of the unbiased, unthinking mind.
Nice.
So I think there's something to that of ego is kind of this fixed quality. We talked about fixation on...
I'm going to take back what I said about our mind being the ego.
Okay.
But generally speaking, you know, if you want to get a sense of your ego, like, you could look at your thoughts, right?
I think so. I mean, I think, you know, what you think about certainly indicates, you know, what you're trying to manage and mediate in the world. And also there's a whole school of thought that, you know, look at your thoughts and then how is that predetermining and dictating your reality? What does your life look like? How is that based upon how you're thinking of yourself in the world?
Yeah, it could be a bit of a chicken and egg thing.
Well, and I think that's some of the freedom of the green. You know, we tend to want to...
Okay, so
I tend to want to bash green.
Okay.
But the truth is that there's an enormous amount of new freedom when you reach that stage to actually pick and choose your reality. And get into grooves. You know, I have choice, finally, on like what I think and who I am, and can be whatever I want to be. And there's a room, you know, finally. I don't have this fixed identity. It hasn't like fully leapt into a more integral way, but there's a huge gift, which is why it's a kind of fundamental strata in the entire sequence. An important rung on the ladder. So
I think another thing with our ego is it is keeping us safe. We're trying to. It's trying to keep us doing the things that it thinks that we should be doing, you know, like helping motivate us to like maybe get a better job or to finish school or go back to school, or, you know, it can be connected to all these kinds of drives that we have. And that can become, so many people that I see and work with are living, and I relate to this 100%, like we're living with a sense of never enough. I'm never enough. It's never good enough. Always trying to do more, always trying to earn more money or get more of this or more of that. And in our society, like, just amplifies that a million times over and over again, you know, and then social media amplifies that even more. So I think that is, we talk about ego getting a bad rap, like some of those kinds of things are what I think about as suffering. It's causing us unnecessary suffering constantly. But yeah, I like the idea of ego as a tool, or having a sense of self and also having some sense of being able to transcend that. You know, like if I want to go to a restaurant and order a meal, like I need to have some sense of who I am and what I want to eat. And to know that doesn't, that's kind of a dumb example, but it doesn't define me 100%, you know? Like when we go to sleep at night and fall asleep, like all this kind of stuff kind of disappears for a while. Or maybe under psychedelics, like you could be like, wow, that thing that I was obsessed about for so long isn't even here. Like I'm not even thinking about it. It's totally gone. That proves that it's not fundamental to who I am. Something can disappear for a while like that.
Yeah, which gets back to what is the fundamental quality of the self, ego or not. And to me, and to a lot of these great traditions that I've studied in and under, it's awareness. That awareness is always arising.
Yeah.
And whether it's seeing through the filters and lenses of ego, or seeing from a more unconditioned place, still, moment to moment, time after time, you wake up in the morning and there's something there. There's something witnessing, something viewing.
Yeah.
So it might be a good time actually to get into some of these practices that can actually help decondition. Because I have a few. I know you probably have a lot of tools.
Yeah, let's hear from you.
Yeah, well, I have been practicing Taoist sexuality techniques since 2009. And I've found that to be incredibly pleasant and fun, but also the energy and kind of fulfillment and wholeness energy that it gives you flies directly in the face of what you earlier called these deficiencies that our culture harks upon.
Like, I'm not enough.
Not harkens upon, preys upon.
Praise it, yeah.
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 Like sharks on, like a vulture or something. So the sexual practices that involve, for men, non-ejaculation and semen retention, and then utilizing subtle libidinal energy in your system and like managing it somehow and regulating energy in a kind of cycle in your body, because the culture will tell you that if you don't ejaculate, you get blue balls, which is totally true unless you're practicing breathing techniques for circulating energy throughout your body, your limbs. And in the Taoist lexicon, that's called the microcosmic orbit, or shooting libidinal energy up your spine with your breath, and then breathing it down your forehead and body and back down to your perineum, creating a circle of energy that you start to like regulate energy out into your limbs. And it starts to feel like almost this like God energy type of fulfillment that you can then, if you have the right partner who's also practicing or trained in this, the practice between lovers becomes even more potent because it's kind of like you're cycling energy back and forth. And this is like an incredible tool for, well, awakening, I think, is my thesis, because it's kind of supercharging your energy body and giving you the energy that it requires to break through the kind of conditioned mind and break out of the deficiency needs and into something that's more on a level of being needs. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's beautiful. And so how did you get involved with that? Like, how did you learn about that?
My friend Dean, my first year at Naropa, was like, hey, I want to show you something. And he sent me Montauk Chia's Multi-Orgasmic Men.
Yeah. That's a classic book. I have that, and I've heard some people criticize some of the things in it, but I think that it can certainly be, if you do it in the right way, it could be powerful. I've also heard people talk about the danger of getting too fixated on never ejaculating, basically, just to put it out there.
Totally.
So
yeah, that's a huge pitfall. Yeah, and that's absolutely not what I'm promoting.
Well, you're right.
Yeah, I've known people who said, I'm going to be celibate for a month, and this is different than no-fap. No-fap is a movement where you don't masturbate. I am pro-fap. To me, it's about...
I haven't heard that.
Fap?
Yeah.
It's like the sound that masturbation makes. Fap, 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 fap. It's a movement online. No-fap is like, don't masturbate at all.
For mostly geared towards men? Is that...
Yeah, I suppose.
No-fap.
I suppose. Although I don't know. It's a good question.
And are they promoting that for like health reasons, or is this...
To me, it strikes me as puritanical.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Kind of like a moral...
Like it's wrong to...
Yeah.
No, I don't like that.
But I don't know. Different people have different reasons. So just saying that I'm pro-fap. When you start practicing, it's going to be hard to retain your seed and cultivate this energy. Because again, this idea of being on fire.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's challenging.
It's extremely challenging.
It's not what you're probably used to.
But it's also extremely rewarding. And after practicing for months or years, you can begin to have multiple orgasms as a man, which is incredible.
You're talking about multiple orgasms as a man without ejaculating.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
And they're going to be a different quality or kind than an ejaculatory orgasm.
Definitely, because when you're dealing with the energy of orgasm, it's that same kind of upward movement that like makes you yawn and like take in and like open up. And it's, to me, it also echoes of this idea of going beyond ego or self-contraction. So it's this cultivating energy like stallions, and then letting it take you into the free fields, so to speak, to use an analogy, which I hope is helpful.
Yeah.
But the idea is you cultivate sexual energy, you move it around your body, you let it open up your body, and then you open up the channel that your brain gets rewarded by this orgasm, but then in a cruel double punch, it also takes away your vitality when you ejaculate. For most men, I notice this, and a lot of men agree with me on that. I ejaculate, I'm tired, I want to eat pizza and go to sleep.
I guess for me, I think it depends on maybe the frequency. Like at some point I can feel more, have more vitality after. And if it's been a while.
Definitely.
Right, yeah.
I agree, which is why it's very body specific, and you don't want to just be moralistic in a kind of self-negating way, but you want to find kind of a new way of relating to your own sex energy and your own
and it's conscious
erotic power therein.
Yeah. I guess
instead of just constantly, pulling the plug on your own energy. I think Chia called it energetic harikari or something like that.
Oh, well. That was when the Japanese soldiers would commit suicide.
Yeah. Seppuku. Yeah. This idea of suicide of your vital energy or vitality. So that's that.
That's, and I think it's fascinating. I want this, personally, I want to be pro-sexuality. When you talk about the anti-masturbation, people, I haven't even heard of that, but FAP, is that what it's called?
No FAP.
No FAP. I don't like that. There's been so much shame and so much stuff put on our sexuality.
No FAPs for you.
Because part of what we're talking about, I think, is making this part of ourselves more conscious and experiencing more fully, maybe trying different things out, instead of keeping it in the shadow and just kind of doing what you've always done, or with a sense of shame or a sense of whatever.
Yeah.
And I personally love this idea that our sexuality and our spirituality can be together. They can be a spiritual practice too, if you want to use that language.
Yes, they absolutely can. And my thesis is that utilizing sexual energy for spiritual growth is really effective. So not only are they complementary, but they can be used, one can be used for the other and vice versa.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, there's a lot there, but what would you recommend for someone listening to this who wants to get started or wants to try some of this out?
Yeah.
You were saying you're pro-fap, like masturbating more. That could be helpful. Yes, masturbating more without ejaculating, if you're a man. Using visualization techniques of the microcosmic orbit to see energy or feel energy moving around your body in a kind of circuit from your tailbone, up your spine, down your forehead. The practice includes touching the tip of your tongue to the roof of your mouth to complete the circuit, and then breathing it down the soft front of your body and through your genitals and back to the perineum, and then creating this cycle of energy. So to start, masturbate, don't watch porn, cut that out for the times that you're doing the practices. That's good advice. Do you want to say more about that? I think that the tendency is for your brain to get too excited, and that almost always leads to quick ejaculation. And also, it takes you out of your body. You're staring at a screen. thinking about the image. You're not instead of feeling yourself.
It's like instead of your entire body getting warmed up, like I had a friend who came into town this summer and has a fleet of cars, and we drove McLarens around.
Oh, nice.
It was really fun. And when we started them up, you know, you got to wait for a while for them to get warmed up until you can really like take off with them.
Right.
140, you know, down the highway or whatever it is. Insane cars. But in the same way, it's kind of like instead of letting your body get naturally turned on and open up these channels and let the energy kind of slowly percolate, it's kind of like your brain sees it and it's like this
instant gratification.
It's like squirrel complex, you know what I mean? And you know, I've done that plenty of times, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but it's so much less fulfilling than these practices that it's funny. Like these practices are absolutely revolutionary for your sexuality. In general.
Yeah.
So just to recap, like masturbate, porn out of the room, don't look at screen, listen to your body, use the breath to kind of like open your body up and like breathe energy out. And then when you're at 80 or 90% where you feel like you're about to ejaculate, like hands off and use the breath to kind of circulate this energy until you feel like you're no longer on the edge. And then continue from there. And listen to your body, of course. Like, I'm not advising being celibate. I think that would be a mistake for most people. Although some people, I think it's a legitimate spiritual aim. And then, just as you have control over your body and what you feel like moment to moment. And the quality of your energy. Yeah. And there's a lot of power in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, rather than feeling depleted and contracted and, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a podcast with Ben Jaffe about sexuality and Tibetan Buddhism a few months ago, and we talked about, you know, related stuff, like meditation practices from the Buddhist tradition around working with sexual energy. And there's a lot of like amazing practices where you know, everyone's seen these images of Buddhas in union. And I like the idea that we have we have masculine, we have feminine energies within ourselves. And we can start to bring them into union within ourselves. Like some way in which our sexuality is so externalized, right? For obvious reasons, like you want to find a partner and all that. I'm not knocking that, but like to be able to like find more fulfillment within you. Like if you have bliss or an orgasm or whatever, it's coming from within you actually. Like your partner may help you get there, but it's you're a part of it too. So you don't need to like feel this like great neediness for someone else to fulfill you. I think that is another interesting angle to look at it.
It is. And I have noticed that I seem to become more sexually attractive to the opposite sex, or when I'm like retaining my seed and cultivating my sexual energy, especially after a week.
Interesting.
Because according to the work of John Gray, your testosterone as a man doubles after 7 days of not ejaculating.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So testosterone is neuroprotective.
Yeah.
Creates a cascade of hormonal reactions.
It takes a lot of energy for our body to produce it. And then the other thing I've heard that's in Taoism too is like as you get older, it's good to ejaculate less often.
Yeah. Like in your teens and 20s, you don't really feel it that much.
Right.
But, you know, I'm 31.
Yeah.
And if I ejaculate too much,
you feel it.
I like need a day. And then, of course, there's the practice of meditation, which is just, you know, an incredible practice for identifying less as a fixed ego and more as awareness itself.
Yeah.
And I know you know a ton about that.
Yeah. Yeah, they can go together, and it's, you know, I think different people find different practices that work for them and that make sense for their lifestyle and for who they are. But it's good to have like, I think it's exciting to see stuff like what you were just sharing, like become more commonly known and to be, you know, it's more getting more out there.
Yeah.
And I think for cultural reasons, it's been kept, you know, kind of secret or under the radar, or like all the stuff around Tantra. It's kind of like the secret path. I think a lot of that is because of the cultural landscape. in which these things were existing, like conservative traditional cultures.
Well,
that basically look down on sexuality outside of creating children, and that's not just Roman Catholicism. That's true across in Asia too.
Yeah.
So.
And I think if you don't do a lot of work kind of clarifying your intentions and purifying yourself, the power that comes from these practices can be enormously abusive and destructive. And there it is. Like, whenever you're talking about power, again, to kind of harken back to the beginning of this conversation, you aren't talking about, you're talking about a dynamism or, how can I better put this?
Like there's
it becomes a choice, and it's kind of like a circuit breaker. Like, it could flip either way. So unless you've done the work around clarifying your intentions, and
that's so important.
Yeah,
good intentions, compassionate motivation. I've heard a lot of great Buddhist lamas, teachers talk about, like, the real thing that makes something quote unquote Buddhist or not a practice. Is do you have good motivation? Compassion and motivation,
right?
And some idea of emptiness or selflessness. Like, if you have those two things, genuinely have those two things, then whatever you're doing with that motivation, with that understanding, can be a part of your practice.
True. Or you could not practice at all and just be a good person. And to me, that's good enough.
Yeah, that's a good thing in this world.
Yeah, it is. I've been practicing meditation since age 12. Yoga since 16, Taoist sexuality since 21, and they're incredibly potent practices. It always comes back to the heart for me, and being able to love more fully. You can go to the most empty state, and it's lonely. Then you feel isolated and alienated by that. But it's so powerful in kind of seeing a less fixed and rigid picture of what self really means. And you can also go to a selfless place that feels very full, and there's this sense of, like, God is, like, present in every breath. But I guess what I'm saying is, without the love, the care, the compassion, and what I think you're calling the feminine side of the masculine erotic power, there's, what is it from Star Wars? There can be no balance in the Force.
Nice. Have that balance.
Totally true. Thank you, George Lucas.
I've been watching the Avatar show. The last Airbender. It's all about balance and balancing everything.
Nice.
It's a beautiful message.
Yeah, balance. And I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being on again.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And where can people reach you if they want to learn more?
So my website is kvnmkg.com. That's Kilo Victor Nancy Michael Kilo George.com. and go there, and my email and contact information is there. If you want to check out a free session with me, I have availability and would love to work with the right people who are interested in utilizing these ancient practices for the right reasons.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have found this podcast valuable, there are many ways in which you can support it. You can share it with friends and on your social media. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast listening app. And you can visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/astateofmind. For show notes and more information unique to each episode, visit astateofmindplay.com. And to learn more about my work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, visit julianocean.us. And please don't hesitate to send me a message or email and let me know what you think and contribute to our conversation. Thank you so much for your support. It is listeners like you that make all this so very much worthwhile.